so I'm going to go ahead and talk to you about how to form the preterite. And it's fairly easy. You're basically doing the same thing that you did in the present tense. You have three different types of verbs. Just like in the present tense, you have AR verbs, ER verbs, and IR verbs. And when you want to conjugate a verb, for example, we've got tomar, which means to take. If you want to take it from being take to took, I took, you took, we took, etc., you're going to do the same thing that you did in the present tense. You're going to get rid of your ending. That would be your AR ending, your ER ending, or your IR ending, which is your ending. And you're going to keep your stem, which is everything in front of your ending. So for tomar, that's tom. For comer, that's com. For vivir, that's bib. And then you're going to add the following endings. So if I want to say, I took 5 classes last semester, I'm going to say yo tomé. If I want to say you took 5 classes last semester, I'm going to say tomaste. If I wanted to say he or she or you formal took 5 classes last semester, I'm going to say tomó. Él tomó, ella tomó, usted tomó. If I want to say we took, tomamos. If I want to say y'all took, tomasteis. If I want to say y'all took or they took, tomaron. So these are the endings that you would add. You'd add an E with an accent for the first person. You'd add an ASTE for second person informal, an O for second person formal, an O for third person singular, an AMOS for first person plural, an ASTEIS for second person informal plural, an ARN for second person formal plural, and an ARN for third person plural. And you're going to do the same thing over here if it's an ER, and you'll notice that ERs and IRs have the same ending, so we can go ahead and mention that too. ER and IR verbs have the same preterite endings. Okay, and so for an ER or an IR verb, you're going to add an E to say I ate, I lived, comí, viví. You ate, comiste, you lived, viviste. You formal lived, usted, or you formal ate, usted comió, usted vivió. Él comió, he ate, or ella comió, she ate. He lived, él vivió, ella vivió. Nosotros comimos, we ate. Nosotros vivimos, we lived. Y'all ate, comisteis. Y'all lived, vivisteis. Y'all ate, comieron. Y'all lived, vivieron. And they ate, comieron, and they lived, vivieron. Okay. And we already went over when we use the preterite and the imperfect. The only thing they want to note down here is that for the ARs and the IRs, the present tense form endings are the same as it was in the present tense. But other than that, there's nothing new. So let's do a little bit of practice with these endings. Okay, so in this activity to practice, here I've got our endings, how we form our verbs. It says, what happened yesterday and last year, part B. So we're going to read the sentence and plug in the correct verb, and then we're going to conjugate it correctly into the preterite tense. So we've got tomar, to take, jugar, to play, empezar, to start or begin, leer, to read, and desayunar, to eat breakfast. So ayer mi esposo y yo blank a las 8 de la mañana. So let's see, probably we ate breakfast would work out here. So I'm going to plug that in. Ayer mi esposo y yo desayunar. Whoops, let's do it in red. Desayunar. Okay, now I can't circle because then I would click out of what I ultimately want to do, but, well, I could. Let's see. Okay, so we had desayunar, okay, as the verb that we're going to use. So I'm going to take it out really quickly so I can do some coloring. So we've got ayer, mi esposo y yo. So the people who are doing this eating of breakfast are my husband and I, which is the same thing as we. Nosotros. Okay, so then I'm going to plug my verb back in here. Desayunar. I want to change the spelling of my verb so that it reflects that it's we who's doing the eating. So the first thing that I'm supposed to do is get rid of my ending, which is the AR. So I get rid of the AR and I have desayun. All right, then it was an AR verb. Desayunar is an AR verb. So I'm going to look at the AR column and what is the ending that goes with nosotros? If I scroll across here, the ending is an AMOS. So if I want to say my husband and I ate breakfast at 8 in the morning, I'm going to put AMOS. Nosotros desayunamos a las 8 de la mañana. Okay. Then over here, yo tomé té y mi esposo probably, if I drank tea, my husband probably drank café. Okay, so again, I'm gonna take that out. Who's drinking the coffee this time? My husband, which is the same thing as saying he. He's drinking coffee. Él. Okay, so then I'm gonna plug my verb back in here. I have tomar. The first thing I want to do is take away the AR, and I'm left with my tome. And then I scroll down for he. The ending is supposed to be an O with an accent. And that's how I say my husband drank café. Después de desayunar, mi esposo blank el periódico. El periódico is como news and record. It's a newspaper, so we're probably going to be reading it. So I'm going to plug in leer. Okay, and who is it that's doing the reading? It's going to be my husband again. He's the one who's doing the reading, which would be the same thing as él. Okay, so then I'm going to plug, oh, I forgot to undo, hold on, let me undo this. Sorry. Okay, so what I had up there was my husband, which is the same thing as él. Whoops. Okay, and I'm going to plug my verb back in there. Okay, and the first thing I'm supposed to do is get rid of my ER. It's an ER verb, so I go to the ER column, and for L it would be I-O. Okay, and now this is something I'm going to show you in a minute. As soon as we're done with this activity, I think this is the only one that's a problem. I'm going to, well, no, there's one more in the second part. I'm going to pull up this and explain it more in depth so that you can see it. But in Spanish, they don't really like to have three vowels next to each other, which is what you're getting right here. So when you end up with a situation that would put an E, an I, and an O next to each other, you're going to change that I to a Y to conserve sound, because le-I-O is a lot harder to sound than say than le-yo. Okay. El periódico y yo play con nuestros hijos. Well, what you're probably doing with them is jugar. Play, right? And who's doing the playing? Whoops. Who's doing the playing is me, yo. Okay, so if I back in jugar, I take away my AR, and the ending that I need to add for yo is an E. Now, this is another one that I'm going to go over in a minute with you guys. The problem when I do that is that G has two sounds. A G next to an A, like in its infinitive form, jugar, has a G sound. G next to an E or an I gets a H sound. But if this verb was originally jugar with a hard G sound, even when we conjugate it, we want to keep that hard G sound. So what you can do to keep the hard G sound when you are adding an E or an I to your verb when conjugating it is to put a little silent U in there between your G and your E. So jugué. Al mediodía yo blank a preparar el almuerzo. That's empezar. I probably should have. Okay. So then, let me get that. Okay, so who's doing the prepare at the beginning to prepare the lunch? It's me. Okay, and again, I'm going to take away that AR, and what I'd be adding for an AR verb is an E to say that I am doing it. And again, this is another rule, and I think what I'm going to do when we finish this one is I'm going to go ahead and explain those rules. You can't have a Z next to an E. If that situation ever arises, because you guys remember when you were making luz and lapis plural, that you had to change your Z to a C. Well, the same scenario happens here. So you would say empecé. So let's go ahead. Let me save this. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and talk about some of these changes. The first one deals with the CAR, GAR, and ZAR verbs. And what happens is if you have a verb like well, we already talked about the GAR, but ZAR works the same way. C has two sounds. C can sound like K next to an A, an O, a U, or a consonant. And it can sound like a S next to an E or an I, okay? Well, if your verb in its infinitive form has a hard C sound, we want to keep that hard C sound throughout. So if I have the verb buscar, which I'll go ahead and put up here. Okay, so if I have the verb, I went ahead and pulled our other endings in, but if I have the word buscar, okay, it has a hard C sound. It's pronounced buscar. I'll put that in there. Buscar. That's how you pronounce it. Not buscar, buscar. So when I conjugate it, what I'm doing is I keep that B-U-C. So I would have B-U-C-E, B-U-S-C-A-S-T-E, B-U-S-C-O. And you can see I'm just taking the endings from up here and plugging them down here. Buscamos, buscasteis, buscaron. Okay, so with all of these, when I conjugate, my C is next to an A, my C is next to an O, my C is next to an A, etc. So being next to an A or an O, it keeps the K sound. But if I put it straight next to an E, it makes the S sound. So what I would have is buscar, busé, buscaste, buscó, buscamos, buscasteis, buscaron. Well, it would make more sense for me to have buscar, busqué, buscaste, buscó, buscamos, buscasteis, buscaron. That's what I want. This spelling can't give me that. So what you do, and only for the yo form, is before you add the E, you change your C to a QU. And you do that simply because that is the only way you can get that K sound next to an E, and that's what we want to keep. It's not necessary to make that spelling change anywhere else because you would have a C next to an A or an O, and that would keep the K sound, okay? The same thing happens with GAR verbs. I have the verb llegar, okay? And it's pronounced like this, llegar, okay? It has the hard G sound. G next to an E or an I would have a H sound, okay? But we want to conserve the sound that's in our original verb, which is a G sound. So if I conjugate it out, I've got this. Okay, so this is what I would have. Everywhere except for in the yo form, my G would be next to an A or an O, which would keep the G sound. In the yo form, if I leave it as this, it's going to have a H sound. To keep the G sound, I have to put a silent U in there. So for any verbs that end in CAR in the preterite tense, when you conjugate it for the yo form, you change your C to a QU for yo. And for GAR, you put a U between your G and your E, but the change only happens for the yo form.